Alrighty, welcome to the 140th edition of the MMA Circus here on BloodyElbow.com and live on YouTube. My name is Nick Baldwin. He is Jed Meshew of MMAfighting.com. He's our guest co-host this week. Andrew Lawrence, as we speak, is on a flight out to LAX for a business adventure, although I something in, part of me doubts that it is business, but we'll let Andrew say what he wants. But Jed, you're here. First time in a couple weeks, so not a too long layoff for the king here on the program. How's it going?
Hey, like Conor McGregor, I don't shy away from a fight with anybody. I'll step up on just hours' notice to fill in and do my damnedest. So I'm doing okay. Not exactly prepared for this, but I don't need to be ready. I stay ready.
Yes, and honestly, as long as you caught some of last weekend's fights and know who Cub Swanson and Brian Ortega are, or at least somewhat
Never heard of them. Who the fuck are those guys?
Maybe get off the show then. I'll have to bring in Wes.
See you guys later.
All right, shout out sponsors, plugs, anything else? What was yours?
I got no sponsors, but thanks, guys. It's been fun. And Nick, you take it from here.
All right, so I guess solo pod from here. I haven't done one of these solo podcasts for a while, so this might be a quick one. But yeah, anyways, so enough of that. The weather in Winnipeg. It is winter. It is officially winter. Today was the coldest day since I guess last winter by quite a bit. I know last week, earlier this week, even it was over the weekend pretty warm. Like for you, still freezing cold, but I'll go to Atlanta first. What are you rocking as far as temperature goes down south?
I don't know. I was in shorts today.
So that's good enough.
It's fine. 70s.
Yeah, you want to take a stab at what the wind chill is. So there's a difference.
Minus 27.
I feel like you saw this on Twitter.
I saw you tweet earlier today, yes.
What did I tweet about again? Oh, right, because the Winnipeg.
You tweeted about how it's minus 27 wind chill in Winnipeg.
Although that's Celsius. That was so Fahrenheit minus 17, not much better.
Okay. Well, yes. So either way.
Still, yeah. It was. I went to school this morning. It's from where I parked to my school. It was like a 2-minute walk, 3-minute walk. Considering I have to cross a busy street and there's a light, my hands were starting to turn blue in that period of time.
Yeah, I imagine. I've never been in negative degree weather. It sounds shitty.
Yeah. It is. Don't come to Winnipeg. If MMA fighting needs someone to step up on short notice, I don't know. Ariel pulls. I know you. Are you guys even going to the Winnipeg card? Probably not.
I don't think so.
Yeah,
Alex might be. I guess maybe Alex might, but I don't know.
Yeah, I don't blame you guys. I wouldn't want to either. Unfortunately, I live here, so I don't have to, but
we might send some. Yeah, maybe Alex is going to go to Winnipeg because
I mean it's a good card.
Yeah,
it's a really good card. Josie Aldo cancel kind of sucked a little bit, but doesn't take away from the main event, of course, Lawler RDA. But it's so funny how typically I feel like if this card was in the southern U.S. where it's warm right now, there'd be a lot more media going because there's not much media going. Like James Lynch, who goes to a number of Canadian cards, isn't going just because it's a little far out. Aaron Bronstetter from TSN isn't going, I know. A lot of people are not going to this one there. But as I said, no one's surprised. I'm not surprised.
Yeah, I mean, why in God's name would you go to a place that cold? That seems stupid. It's almost as dumb as living in a place that cold.
Tell my parents that and their parents do. Something going on in your background. I hear a bunch of noise. Is that just you?
Hold on, I'll take care of it.
Okay, cool. So let's with that while Jed Meshew goes and does what he has to do, and he's back. So not a ton going on in the world of mixed martial arts. This week we had 2 cards. This past weekend we had UFC 218, and one day prior we had the Ultimate Fighter 26 finale, the inaugural UFC Women's Flyweight Champions crowned. Not a good card on paper, but interestingly, to my surprise of sorts, pretty good card off of paper. Main event was fun. Co-main was pretty fun. Sean O'Malley getting his first UFC victory over Tyrion Ware. We also had a barn burner on the prelims between Ryan James and Andrew Sanchez. Overall, a decent night of fights in Vegas. I know this didn't get a ton of coverage because it was sort of being overshadowed by 218, which was the following night on the other side of the U.S. But nonetheless, a decent night of fights. Did you watch any of this card, Jed?
The tough card.
Yeah.
Yeah, I caught some of it. I was working the Bellator event, so I didn't have my entire focus on it because I had to be watching the Bellator fights. But I got the big strokes from it. Got the main takeaways.
Speaking of Bellator, I watched some of it very often on. Like I had a stream up on my laptop of it during some of the tough card. I know I caught like a little bit of the Hisaki Kato fight with
Shitty and Jokawani.
with him and the main event after I didn't end up watching it, but
Julia
it
Budd,
was
Arlene Blinko.
yeah, no, I know what it was, but
Yeah.
apparently terrible fight as you can probably say. So it seemed like I find it hilarious how you were hyping this card up so much and well deserved. I mean, it was on paper good, but it didn't seem to sort of play out in great fashion.
No, it was fucking terrible.
So,
I mean, the main event was never going to be exciting because Julia Budd's not exciting, but
at least you could have finished, maybe. Like that's sort of what.
it at least had stakes, like Julia Budd is
Yeah.
justifiably one of the top five,
They had more
probably
stakes than the
probably
tough
the
card.
second
Let's do
second best women's featherweight on the planet, if we're being realistic. It's like that's Julia Budd has a rightful claim to that title, and so at least has stakes that matter. But
More so than a tough card.
yeah. But the Chidi and Jokawani Hisaki Kato fight, which should have been really fun, ended up not being all that interesting, which was kind of a letdown. I really expected a lot more out of that fight. I think a lot of people did. Thought it to be much more entertaining than it was. And yeah, so the whole card was definitely a letdown. It was definitely a letdown.
Yeah. Well, the Ultimate Fighter 26, as I said, wasn't much of a letdown. We had a good night of fights top to bottom for the most part. There were a few sort of not great parts, but I mean, we had some fun fights. We had like four fights that were considered pretty fun fights. The last three fights I think were all fun. The first two more than, Honchak Murphy was a decent fight. O'Malley Ware I really enjoyed. Main event was decent. And then, of course, as I said, Sanchez James on the prelims was really fun. Not super high level, but back and forth and fun to watch. I find it interesting with his card, though. Like, it finished, and it's not like I didn't have the feeling I have after a good card. Like, it didn't feel post-fight like a good card, even though on paper it was, or not on paper, but like when it was all said and done. Like we had a lot of finishes. We only went to the judges a few times on that Friday night in Vegas. But I think how much it didn't matter on paper because this was a tough finale, because almost all of these fights were related to the Ultimate Fighter 26, which I was not invested in whatsoever. I just didn't care about the card enough to, even though we had a lot of great submissions and good finishes, good fights, I just didn't care enough for it almost to be a fun night of fights, even though, when you look at it, it was. I think also, though, with the submissions, and this is something I talked about on the sixth round, who I did with Zane Simon after this card, a lot of these undercard submission wins, we had a ton of arm bars as well, I think tying the record for most on a card in modern UFC history. It's because it's not actually high level grappling. It's more just because the person got getting tapped out.
It was horrible grappling.
Exactly. And they just have so low level defense where we're going to see quick submissions. But when we know it's so low level grappling, doesn't really matter. Like, does that count as a good moment? And to me, not really.
No, I thought the fight card was actually terrible. I know a lot of people seem to think it was okay. I thought it was like watching a legacy event for the most part. And I don't want to denigrate the men and women that fought on this card, but if you got rid of if you just like cut everybody on the card, I don't think it substantively affects the UFC in a negative manner. Like, I understand that Roxanne Modafferi and Barb Honchak have paid their dues, and by virtue of that, they are amongst the top tier, top echelon of women flyweight competitors on the planet. I think the same holds. I think Nicco Montano shows promise in the division, but all of the undercard fighters, they all fought on TUF, but man, like none of those people are good fighters. And even the ones who won, it's still like they're getting wins over people who can't grapple. And it was just like I was watching it and I would hear Daniel Cormier it just felt like he was shocked by how bad it was because he kept being like, look at what this woman's doing. She's doing the exact opposite of what's correct. She just rolled into this armbar. Like, oh, she doesn't have any defense whatsoever, and that's why she got tapped out instantly. It's just this is not stuff that, I know that being a UFC level fighter doesn't mean what it used to mean 10 years ago, or having competed in the UFC is not nearly the accomplishment it once was, but man, we really hit a pretty low bar with a lot of what we saw on Friday night. And, I feel bad saying that because it sounds mean, but I think it's very accurate. Like, Ryan James had a great win against Andrew Sanchez. Ryan James is not a UFC caliber fighter. And by virtue of that, sort of means Andrew Sanchez isn't either. Like, it was a entertaining card if you don't really care about the quality of the product sitting in front of you. But I was very underwhelmed by it.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. And again, as I said, a lot of this was TUF 26 related, hence it being the finale. But as someone who didn't watch The Ultimate Fighter, and I mean, people are going to cop on here and probably say, "Oh, well, why are you complaining?" I mean, yeah, technically, I guess I shouldn't. If I guess people enjoy these fights more if they watched TUF and knew more about, someone like Christina Marks, but personally, I didn't. She's not really an elite flyweight. A lot of these fighters I just don't really care about. Right now, the women's flyweight division in the UFC isn't fantastic. I mean, it just opened up though, and so that sort of leads me to my question. Like, is this just a period of time where we have to sit and wait? Because I remember the strawweight division at a point in the UFC wasn't fantastic. Like, there was a lot of fighters I wasn't, aware of who they were, but now it's actually a pretty solid division. Do we just have to wait, or do you have sort of a sense that the flyweight division might never actually get good?
Oh, no, I think the flyweight division will end up being probably the best division in women's mixed martial arts. I do think that there is a lot of there's a lot of waiting that's going to have to be done on that because right now, currently, the flyweight division in its future is going to be a lot of people cutting a little too much to make 115, or a lot of undersized fivers because there's that 20-pound gap. And it will fill itself out very well. But I also think it's worth noting that even when the strawweight division debuted, like the women on that season of TUF, whatever it was, TUF 20 or whatever the hell it was, most of those are like that had a way bigger talent pool. That had much more accomplished fighters in it and much better fighters top to bottom. I mean, you look at that season of TUF and you've still – let me pull up the rankings just off the top of my head to have them, but I would say you've probably still got at least 5 ranked strawweights from that season.
Carlos Esparza, Randa Marcos,
Herrig, Angela Hill has come on.
She's
frankly,
but
like I mean, she's gotten so much better and is going to end up with a ranking behind her name soon enough. I mean, everybody knew when that season happened that the real champion was going to be, or at least I think the hardcore fans, the people in the know, I certainly felt that the winner was going to be the winner of the Gedalia Jędrzejczyk fight that was happening kind of concurrently with the season, and that woman was going to get a title shot, and whoever won that would then beat whoever won the TUF tournament. And it ended up playing out that way. But, this season, I think that there is a very credible case to believe that most of the women on this season won't be in the UFC in the next couple of years, in the next year or two. And that, Roxanne Modafferi is a wonderful story and a wonderful human being. And I really wanted her to win the title because that would have been a moment that meant something. But I don't think that she is functionally actually one of the best women's flyweights on the planet after that division kind of susses itself out. And as a result, the fact that her and Barb Honchak were the main seeds on the card and went as far as they did kind of proves to me that this was not a great season. You should be finalists. Sajara Eubanks and Nicco Montano basically won their way to the top strictly by just being pretty decent athletes. Like there's just not a lot of raw talent in that house. They were the best athletes among the group, and so that kind of rose itself to the top to get their way into the final. I don't know if we'll ever see Sajara Eubanks compete at flyweight again. Sort of feels like she might actually be a bantamweight. And Montano has the belt, but Montano is going to lose that belt basically her next fight. Like I'm higher on Paige Van Zandt than most. I still don't think Paige Van Zandt's a great fighter. I think Paige Van Zandt beats up Nicco Montano. I think the real 125 champion is Valentina Shevchenko, and I think that she is so much better than everyone on the show that she could probably beat all of them, like in back-to-back fashion on like the same night. Like if Valentina Shevchenko gets a title shot, if somehow that's how that works itself out, it would be the biggest upset probably in MMA history to me if Nicco Montano beat her, because there is no facet of mixed martial arts in which she is better than Valentina. No single aspect of the game, much less all of them together.
We basically have to wait until all of these fighters drop down or move up from strawweight. There are a number of fighters that I think can do well in the division, just once they actually make the cut or gain the 10 pounds. Even Dana White himself said he expected more fighters to drop down and move up sooner. Like, we haven't seen too many.
Oh, there's going to be a ton. That's the biggest problem with the division. The biggest problem with the division is not what it's going to end up being. It's going to end up being a great division. The biggest problem with the division is it is going to hamstring bantamweight. Bantamweight is already a thin-ass division. If you just look at it, especially once you get outside the top 5, there's not a ton of new talent coming up, and there's
other than Caitlin Vieira, I think actually can do.
No, yeah, well. but who else is? You're still looking at Jermaine Durandamy, Alexis Davis, Liz Carmouche. These fighters have been around for a while. Yeah. There's no new talent, and some of that talent is still going to leave now that flyweight is opened up. I mean, bantamweight is about to be a wasteland of people, and
if Holly Holm, sticks at featherweight, which I don't see happening, but does it? Who knows?
I mean, if she wins the title, I guess, but if she wins the title, then she probably just challenges Amanda Nunes. It's going to be a shit show. 125 is going to be fine. It's going to be the best division in women's mixed martial arts in 2 years. But it's going to have some real adverse effects on 135 and even some adverse effects on 125. 115. I suspect Joanna Jacek doesn't spin long down there. I think that she probably makes a jump up fairly quickly, and you're probably going to see a couple other women competing down there that are going to go up, which could be nice, because then you get somebody like Michelle Waterson, who really is naturally an atom weight, can settle in a little more nicely at straw weight. But it's, I think 125 will be fine going forward, but I think right now it is the worst division in mixed martial arts other than women's featherweight.
Yep. Specifically to Montano's performance, of course, we didn't really talk about it too much. Nicco Montano, of course, is the new UFC women's flyweight champion. She defeated Roxanne Modafferi by 5-round decision. I actually think she looked pretty good in this fight. Like, she didn't look like a bad fighter. I'm not saying I would give her a chance against someone like Shevchenko or a lot of the fighters that would make sense to fight her, but I think she actually looked pretty good. She looked pretty fluid on the feet. Her grappling, I don't think we saw. We saw a little bit of it. I think she got Roxy down maybe once. I barely remember. We've seen so many fights since then already. But I think overall her game looked pretty good on Saturday. I would have been interested to see how she looked against Sajara Eubanks if that fight happened as planned. But nonetheless, fighting or beating Roxy by decision, not something a ton of people can do. So I think Montano looked good. But, before we talk too much about her, let's just sort of wait and see, because is she going to be the champ for long? It's probably going to be like a Carla Esparza situation, if we're being honest, which kind of sucks, because I think she's actually a decent fighter.
It sucks, and frankly, it sucks for Carla Esparza, because Carla Esparza is a much better fighter than Nicco Montano is and was. For her to be kind of in that same category, I disagree. I think Nicco Montano's performance was okay if she was 5 years younger. If she's like pushing 30 now, she's not really much of a prospect and the fact that like she doesn't have a ton of upward mobility here. Just age is a limitation on all fighters. And when you're, I think she's almost 30. Maybe I'm wrong on that. If she was much younger, I'd have a lot higher hopes for her because she seems to understand fighting in some bit of a way. She's young in her career. I think she's only been competing 2 years. And she seems to have some natural flair for it. She is a good defensive wrestler. I think that's one skill set that she actually does possess. She is a pretty okay clinch fighter and a very strong defensive wrestler. But look, Roxanne Modafferi made her career as a grappler. Her striking game is combination kickboxer heavy. Like it's combination heavy, but it's not a lot of power. Nicco Montano got buzzed by her several times. My count, I think I thought Roxanne Modafferi hurt her like 3 separate occasions, and Modafferi either never registered it and then didn't go for the kill on it, or made really questionable choices like shooting takedowns after hurting her. It's just, if you get buzzed by Roxanne Modafferi on the feet, I am not all that confident in your ability going forward, as I guess the long and short of my argument here.
Let's go to the co-main event and talk about Sean O'Malley. A lot of people, some people, I should say, not a lot, some people seem to count him out a little bit, almost as if it's sort of like, oh, he's an up and comer. Dana White is high on him. Oh, he's gonna lose for sure. He's not nearly as good as some people say. But I think O'Malley, and I was kind of in that boat. Like, I gave Ware a pretty good chance in that fight. I ultimately did pick O'Malley to win, but I think I think he proved a lot of people wrong. O'Malley looked really good, and I'm now going to, I admit I'm pretty high on him now after this performance. I know Ware, isn't a world beater, and getting past him doesn't mean a ton, but was his first UFC fight. This was a good step up from the Contender Series over the summer. I'm really excited to see what's next for him. I think he can do big things in the bantamweight division. He's super lanky for the division. He talks, but more performance-wise, skills-wise, his striking is good. Like he switches styles really well. His movements good. He sort of seems like just sort of the style of a new breed fighter, where he's going to. It's almost like he's gonna. I'm not gonna say he's gonna be the one to jump in the top 10 right away, but I feel like his entire style is sort of what we're gonna see more. It's gonna be more common, say in 5 years or whatever down the road. I think he's not new. Like, we've seen that sort of style in the past, but I think it will be effective. He needs to work on his striking defense big time, but I think that just comes over time. He's young. He's going to get better. And he's so calm in there. I think that's a big thing as well. He's super comfortable in the cage, and at only 23 or 24, 25, right around there, that's big as well. Making your debut, seemed to be no jitters. And the other thing, a lot of people criticize his cardio. We were worried. In that second round, he started to gas out a little bit. Tyron Ware started to take over, but he found a second win, and he beat up Tyron Ware in that third round. So that was really surprising. In between second and third round, I thought it was all over for O'Malley, but he put the wood to Tyron Ware in that third round. Super shocking, but props to him because he dug deep in that fight. He had to, but he did what he had to do, and that's promising coming from a guy making your debut and so young.
If anybody ever thought Sean O'Malley wasn't a good fighter, that person was dumb. I didn't hear any of that beforehand, and I would stand by believing that person either never watched him fight before, or I would question their ability to kind of evaluate fighters. Sean O'Malley has a lot of talent. I don't know that he'll be a champion one day, but I think he is absolutely going to end up being a guy who hangs around the top 10 of the division at some point in his career. He just has so much potential, so much growth available to him. And Nick, you were talking about how O'Malley, you think he's this kind of new breed fighter. And to an extent, I sort of agree. I don't think he's a new breed fighter per se, but I think you can see the hallmarks of Dominic Cruz, TJ Dillashaw, and even a little bit of Conor McGregor in his style. And I think that's because of the fact that he is 23 and he watched these guys compete, win championships, accrue accolades. And I think he's adopted some parts of those styles into his game. But more so than that, he is getting better fight in and fight out. And that's one of the things that you expect to see from somebody at his age, but that really impressed me in this fight. I thought he was going to beat Terry Ware. He did beat Terry Ware, but I was interested to see how he did it, how he came in looking. He made a dramatic improvement in his skill sets from the last time we saw him in Dana White's Tuesday Night Contender Series to this time out. His head movement looked sharper, his angles, the way he worked defensively. He still leaves his chin out there to be hit, and he still has a lot of holes and a lot of flaws in his game. But he is also 23, and he has a ton of offense that kind of covers up and masks those holes in his defensive game, especially. And so I suspect those will close as he continues to train, especially if he gets with a bigger camp. And I believe those opportunities are going to, be afforded to him now. The one thing, he's going to take some losses probably sooner rather than later because the UFC is kind of invested in pushing him because he has a personality and he fights in an exciting style. He's a bit of a baby McGregor in the way he kind of throws offense together. But he's going to take losses because he is defensively liable on the feet. And that's basically what we saw. Tyrion Ware is not a great fighter, also has own huge defensive liabilities, but he's able to, in that second round, kind of start putting combinations together and attack the weaknesses that Sean O'Malley has. Sean O'Malley is going to either a really fundamentally sound striker or a guy who can just grind on him they're going to feed him a loss pretty soon, but it's a prospect loss and that's okay. Those things happen. The last point, I think the cardio issues are a little bit overblown. I think he can work on it, certainly, but it's not just that you get tired. He certainly did get tired, but it's if you get tired, but you're still throwing effective offense. And in the third round, Cormier had kind of hung his hat on the fact that, like, man, O'Malley really gassed in that second. He couldn't really see the fact that Tyrion Ware gassed in the third because O'Malley was beating the shit out of him in the third, and he was just landing punches at will. This kid is going to be really good, probably before too terribly long. And I'm excited to see, his next few fights going forward.
The only other thing I would mention, we don't really have much time to talk about it, but just props to Ryan James and Andrew Sanchez. They put on a super fun fight, but more than anything, props to Ryan James. I mean, this guy got knocked down by Sanchez in the first round. If the round was 5 minutes and 20 seconds, an extra 20 seconds, it would have been over. It arguably, I don't know if it actually could have been stopped. It was damn close. I know the referee, I think, warned him once at the very least. But the biggest thing here is Sanchez just gassed so badly, like worse than most fighters you'll see gas. Like, it was really crazy. And Ryan James, who is not a good striker, who, let's be honest, isn't that good. He's not a good fighter. And this was his first TKO victory, so that says something about his striking. He got to TKO late in the third. Super impressive stuff. Super fun fight. Deserved fight of the night. Main event actually got it between Montano and Roxy, but this probably should have taken that $50K bonus. But man, what a fight. Super fun fight, and certainly not what we were expecting. I thought it was going to be sort of Sanchez all day, just lying on top, but James made it interesting and ultimately got the win.
Let's move on. I give no props to either fighter, and this fight speaks to my point earlier. When Andrew Sanchez he gassed and was unable to do anything at all. And except for, even though he was dead in that third round before James ended up stopping him, he was still teeing off on Ryan James because Ryan James has never met a punch that he didn't like to get hit in the head with. So he's an incredibly durable, incredibly tough guy. Good for him. He is also one of the worst defensive fighters in the history of the sport. And Andrew Sanchez, who has always had some cardio struggles, found a way to lose a fight that probably should have been unlosable. So I award you no points, and may God have mercy on both your souls.
Fair enough. Let's move on to talk about UFC 218. Also went down this past weekend, one day after, in Detroit, Michigan, at the Little Caesars Arena. We had Max Blessed Holloway defend his UFC featherweight title for the very first time in a rematch from UFC 212 in June of this year. He defeated Jose Aldo once again by third-round TKO. Super impressive performance, firstly, and super fun card. We had a ton of great fights, which we'll get to as much as we can. Hopefully we won't go super long. Let's try and keep it short and concise, but so we can cover as much as possible because a lot is worth talking about. As far as Max Holloway's overall game goes, like, this guy is an innovator. This is a guy who realizes what he needs to fix and realizes what he is doing well better than very in most people, I think. The guy gets better so much, and in stages, like from one fight to the next, we can see differences. And it's not like he's the most technical striker, but he beats fighters down. He starts a little slow, although I feel like he started less slow in this fight than June, the Aldo first fight. He picks fighters apart early, and then he turns it up a notch, and then that worked really well against Aldo, who naturally fades. And the older he gets, the more drastic that's become his cardio issues. Holloway in the second round and especially the third round turned it up 2 notches pretty much, and started working his body, just letting combos rip all over Jose Aldo. Kind of sad to see on Aldo's part, because this is not the guy that chopped down Uriah Faber, even beat Chad Mendes like 3 years ago. This guy is he's still one of the best featherweights on the planet. He's still probably number 2 in the world in 145 pounds, but he clearly is 2 steps behind Max Holloway. That'll never change, because he's going down. Holloway's still going up. Holloway's not even in his prime. Again, just super impressive stuff. What?
I would argue that point.
I do it.
I think Max Holloway is an incredible fighter. I think everyone has very high expectations for him. I also think he's been fighting for a decade almost. Like he started fighting when he was super young, and he's got a lot of miles on his body already. I think we can expect probably 2 to 3 more years of Max Holloway like this, and then I think we're going to see. I mean, look, Jose Aldo is by most definitions still in his physical prime, but are you really going to argue that Jose Aldo's in his physical prime right now? Like, no,
of course not.
Exactly. Yeah. Like, I think we can expect a similar bell curve with Holloway. We've got some time with him, which is awesome. We need to enjoy that and hopefully get as many fights as we can out of it. But think about kind of the age Jose Aldo's at and how he has, in my mind, pretty noticeably physically depreciated. And consider the fact that he was really only fighting once a year, maybe 1.5 times a year. Early in his career, he fought obviously more frequently, but then at his apex, he was competing once a year. Max Holloway does not compete that few amounts of, or that's a really poorly way to word that. Max Holloway competes more often than once a year, and like I said, I think we got about 3 years left on Max Holloway before he starts to drop off. So we should all enjoy that.
I won't be surprised. I mean, you bring up a good point. The fact, age doesn't. Fight years matters more than actual years as far as age goes, and we all know that. And yeah, Holloway has had like 12 fights since, I don't know, 2013 or 2014. The guy's been on an absolute tear, but he takes his fair share of damage too. Like, he didn't come out completely unscathed.
He's not concerned about his defense at all.
No, but he I think the biggest thing about his defense, he uses movement so well, so he doesn't need to he doesn't need to. He lets himself get into situations in which some fighters might get clipped, like in the pocket, but he's able to move out and that sort of.
He lets himself get hit. He doesn't let himself get hit by 3 or 4 punch combinations, but he will take a couple of shots to exchange 3 or 4 more shots. It's a winning formula, and I'm not saying that what he does is wrong. I think it's fine for him to take 1 or 2 big punches from Jose Aldo in exchange for landing 4 or 5 of his own. The math there checks out, and he's got a great chin to work with that. But he is still taking those shots, and he's shown no real reluctance to take those shots. And, if he's doing that and he's training in the gym and taking those shots in the gym, all of that adds up over time. All I'm saying is people talk about Max Holloway and expect that he is going to go on a 10-year reign like Jose did. I don't think that's the case. It would be really cool if he did, but I'm not going to hold my breath on that point. I think we probably have 3, maybe 5 years of him, fighting at this apex if we're lucky.
Titles change all the time, but if we're being honest, I don't know as of right now who can touch Max Holloway. Yeah, as of this second, I don't know if anybody can. He will eventually.
The second, no. Max Holloway is the best fighter in his division. Maybe if Connor dropped back down to 145,
No,
frankly, I still
they're
think I
never
might
fighting at
favor
145. If they fight again, it's at 155.
probably. But if he did drop down to 145, I might still favor Max.
He
It's
would Connor would pass out to the weight cut almost probably.
I don't think so. I mean maybe, but like Max is not a fucking small featherweight either. But I'm not here to debate the point about what weight they're fighting at. I'm here to talk about them fighting, and I think I would favor Max Holloway in the fight. I don't know though. It's tough. Like he does take shots, and Connor throws much more heat than Jose did, and Max ate a bunch of shots from Jose. Connor is a more offensively potent fighter. Uh, I can see how both their styles kind of work against the other there, but yeah, at this exact moment in time, Frankie Edgar has no fucking chance to beat him. Ricardo Lamas, Cub
No.
Swanson, none of those. In 5 years, I'm a little bit worried that Mirsad Bektic doesn't have a good chin. But in like 3 years, I would expect Mirsad Bektic could probably put him on his ass, assuming his chin isn't as bad as I'm sort of afraid it might be. I mean, featherweight is one of those divisions that actually has a lot of young talent waiting in the wings. Brian Ortega, Yair Rodriguez, Hinata Moicano, Duho Choi. Like, that's a bunch of Jason Knight shit. Like, that's a bunch of kids coming up that are going to be real good.
And we'll find out about
And
Ortega this
yeah,
weekend, whether
yeah,
he can make the big jump.
exactly. I think that there's a lot more potential for him to get upset, not even assuming the fact that I think he's going to drop off physically in the nearish future. I think that there's just a lot more talent waiting in the wings of the featherweight division to come on that might be problematic for him.
As far as the immediate future, let's worry about Mirsad Bektic when he's higher than number 13 and in the title contention, and seeing with a lot of the other fighters. But yeah, to your point, featherweight is very bottom. There's a lot of good up and coming guys at the bottom of the top 15. The Conor fight won't happen right away. But yeah, I'd like to see it down the road a little bit. But I think right now, immediately, I think we have to do Frankie Edgar, run it back, right?
Yeah, that's the fight that happens, and Frankie's can get his ass handed to him.
Yeah. As far as Jose Aldo, now this is an interesting one. Jose Aldo is going to keep fighting. I'd be shocked if he hangs the gloves up. I won't argue. I'd actually be happy if he does, because he's taken a lot of damage in the past just few months, like 6 months over the two Holloway fights. And I don't need to see more of that. I know, again, it's against the best featherweight. And yes, if he was fighting Lamas next week, he would have beaten Lamas. But that wasn't the case. And where does Aldo go? I wouldn't mind seeing him move up to 155. I know it was on short notice, but this weight cut was still really tough for him. And as he gets older, as he takes more damage, I just see the weight cut getting tougher and tougher. So I wouldn't. I'd be open to a move to lightweight. I think that actually be pretty good for him. Even if he's not the best lightweight, which he isn't, I don't think, he would be fresher there. The weight cut wouldn't drain him as much. And also, there's just a ton of fresh matchups. Like Edson Barboza versus Jose Aldo would be super fun. Khabib versus Aldo would be a dream fight for, I think, you and a lot of other people. Not even just because I think Aldo performs better at lightweight than featherweight, but even just for our selfishness, I think the matchups at lightweight are actually quite appealing.
I think the move to lightweight is what happens next for Jose Aldo. I'm interested in it. I would like him to retire, because mainly for the same reasons you kind of outlined, and just for the fact that, like, when you're the GOAT, when you're in the GOAT conversation, when you're one of the greatest, when the drop off comes, it comes. And Anderson's career would be dramatically better if after Weidman beat him the second time, he was like, you know what? I'm just gonna hang it up. Like, I'm pushing 40. I've given everything I can to the sport. Now he's got 2 failed drug tests on him, sullied reputation, and he hasn't given us a fight really worth watching. Like, the last fight that you enjoyed watching the Anderson Silva was in maybe the last 20 seconds of the DC fight where he hit that body kick and you thought, oh shit, maybe Anderson's just gonna come off the couch and do it. So, like, the Nick Diaz fight was fucking boring, and the other fights that he's won have been garbage. I guess the Bisping fight was okay, but that fight was mostly terrible, except for the couple of moments that Anderson decided he would try and punch back and then almost killed Michael Bisping. So I think it's a similar thing. Like, Jose Aldo, if he stays at featherweight, he's going to beat a bunch of featherweights. He's going to beat every featherweight on the planet. It's not named Max Holloway. He would, and Frankie Edgar his ass if they fought a third time. And I think lightweight offers the potential for a lot more fun fights. I think Jose Aldo could do very well against a lot of the top top ranked lightweights. You mentioned Habib. Habib is in fact a fight that I would really like to see. I think the fight would be boring, straight up. I think the fight would be pretty boring for most people, but it's like Jose Aldo can't be taken down and Habib can't strike. So, but Habib is such an interesting, dynamic, different kind of wrestler. Maybe he could take Jose Aldo down. Whoever, if he can, he wins. If he can, he loses. So that's kind of an interesting dynamic to me. But like Jose Aldo fighting Nate Diaz or Dustin Poirier or Anthony Pettis, which I suspicion that that's the fight that actually happens next, is Pettis Aldo main events a fight night card somewhere in early next year or mid next year. But yeah, and the last thing I'll say is I know the weight cut was shitty on Aldo. I don't understand it. I've never understood it. I think Jose Aldo is probably the best fighter MMA has ever seen from a pure talent or a pure skills standpoint. I think he is unquestionably the best defensive fighter MMA has ever had. Then that's not even really up for debate. If you want to argue elsewise, you are almost objectively wrong, frankly. And just the the whole package of his skills, I think, are so much better than almost everybody else that's ever fought. That he has a claim to the GOAT throne, just as a as a byproduct of that, to go along with his 10 years undefeated and dominating the division for as long as he did. But the one thing he was always bad at, and the biggest knock on his career to me, is that he was always terrible at weight cutting. He's not a big featherweight. He's just not. In the same way Johnny Hendricks is not a big welterweight and somehow can't seem to make middleweight weight limits. Jose Aldo's not a big featherweight. Max Holloway dwarfed him in that cage, same as Conor McGregor did when they fought. He has never been a super large featherweight, but he has always struggled with the weight cut because he can't fucking figure it out. And I don't know why. Get somebody in your corner that knows how to do this shit, because that almost certainly hurt his career, that he was cutting weight poorly for a decade. And there's no excuse for it. You're a professional, one of the top in your class. I can't understand why you can be this bad at a part of the game.
Let's talk the co-main event and how scary it was. Francis Ngannou knocks out Alistair Overeem in under 2 minutes. It was an uppercut left from hell. It snapped Alistair's chin back. It was one of the most devastating knockouts. And everyone says this or is saying this, so I hate to sort of copy, but it was as devastating a knockout you'll see. As far as just a straight punch, like, was it the best knockout you'll see? No, of course not, because a flying kick or a flying knee or a roundhouse kick, it was way more entertaining, but that's a deadly knockout.
No, this was the best knockout probably in the history of the UFC. I'll stand on that corner. Up until this point, the best knockout in UFC history is Dan Henderson KOing Michael Bisping. Like, the pure aesthetics of that punch, the way he fell, the way everything kind of came together, I think that is very justifiably the best, just the best, most aesthetic knockout in UFC history. I think this one passes that. Dude, the freeze frame shot where Alistair Overeem's back is arched literally looks like the fucking... You've never seen the movie Snatch, have you?
No, of course not.
Damn it. Okay, well, for all of you who aren't 13 and have actually seen fun Guy Ritchie movies, the movie Snatch is Brad Pitt plays a bare knuckle boxer, and he gets dropped by an uppercut shot from hell. And there's like a freeze frame moment where he is in the exact pose Alistair Overeem's body is, because it's a cartoon movie pose. Like, that's not a thing that real people do in real life when they get hit by real punches. They don't get launched off their feet and arch their back in the air and fall over gracefully. Like, that shit is the most picture perfect KO we've ever seen.
I mean, it was a great knock. I'm not going to take anything away from it.
I just don't fuck a Edson Barbosa Terry Edom knockout. Like, okay, it's cool. Like, yeah, he hit a karate spinning wheel kick, but like, I will take the aesthetics of Overeem falling back like he got uppercutted, like a fucking Mortal Kombat uppercut. Like, whoo, no, yeah. That's the best. It's the best KO in this history of the sport. It's got my vote for KO of the year.
KO of the year. That's definitely a different story. I think that it's up for a debate as far as all time. But let's aside from the actual performance, I feel like, and I don't think I ever thought I would say this, just because he never seemed to have star potential, but I think he does. I think Francis Ngannou actually has a bit of star potential. I don't know. He's not the next Conor McGregor. We know that he never will be Conor McGregor. I'd be surprised if he ever is that big, but I think he can draw some eyes. I think his story helps. I admittedly haven't read too much into it, but he was very poor. I think he was at one
It's
point.
literally homeless.
Yeah, he was homeless. That's what I was thinking as well. In Cameroon, of course, in Africa, growing up, and now to go from that to sort of the fame. Not long ago, he was just a regular UFC fighter, an up and comer. The minute I saw him fight Louis Henrique in his debut, I never heard of the guy before. I knew that guy had potential, but now training, moving to Las Vegas, wearing the fancy clothes, like you can tell he's sort of feeling the effects of being a successful UFC fighter. And I think this guy has what it takes to maybe not be the next big thing, but I think be a bigger fighter than a lot. As far as if he beats Stipe Miocic when they fight, because that will happen next. I think he could be one of the higher drawing champions down the road. Yeah, I see just the fact that he's so big and so devastating. A lot of heavyweights are like that, but like he's almost like a superhero. I think that it actually will draw a little bit. People will like the story. People will like him as a person. He's not, super cocky, but just a hint of confidence. What do you think? Am I totally off here? Is he just going to be another 250K drawing pay-per-view guy, or could he be bigger than that?
I think if the UFC wasn't absolutely terrible at their jobs and weren't horrifically bad promoters of fighters, he would be good at they have the raw tools here to get something. He could go places. He is a big dude. He has a very captivating backstory. He is fun as hell to listen to talk. Like, I don't know, he captivates me when he talks. Like, I think he says fun, enjoyable things. I think he has the baseline stats to get himself there. He also is his biggest advantage is that he is likely going to be the longest reigning UFC heavyweight champion ever. I think he is going to knock the shit out of Stipe. And then after that, who the hell, because heavyweight is such a barren, empty wasteland of talent and skill, and it's mostly populated by people over 40, that he can just kind of knock a bunch of people out going on forever. And, Anderson Silva does not have nearly the kind of baseline ability to be a star that Francis Ngannou does. He doesn't have like quite the interesting backstory. He's not 260 pounds and the most frightening man ever to look at. Those are you can't do a Mike Tyson-esque sell on Anderson Silva, really, but he hung around long enough that eventually he turned into a draw just because he was the best ever, and he kept headlining events for 10 years. So I think Ngannou has certainly the potential to at least be better than Anderson Silva in that regard, assuming the UFC doesn't mismanage the shit out of him. I'm a little afraid that they're going to not be able to handle kind of his backstory, his look, his everything with any type of subtlety or craft, because they're fucking
I think a
terrible at
lot
their
of what they
jobs.
promote is just the fact that he's a freaking
Yeah,
inhumane beast.
he's terrifying, because they only know how to promote. It's a blood feud, or he's the greatest ever. They have two notes. They have two fucking notes they ever hit. There's no subtlety. There's no ingenuity or creativity or craft. They are fucking shit at their jobs, and so I'm afraid that they're not going to be able to promote him in a functionally good way. But I think just because of his youth and his skill and the fact that he's like 3 years into his MMA career or something. Like,
He's going to be around for a long time. This is a guy, I think you can argue, like with Max Holloway, you could argue he'll be around for a while. You could argue he'll be around for 3 years. Francis Ngannou is going to be here in 5 to 10 years, I think.
Yeah, it's heavyweight. He'll stick around for at least a decade and can be at the very top of the sport for that long too. So I hope they do something good with him, because I would like to see them figure out how to market somebody beyond being like he's the most dangerous man that's ever lived. But we'll see what happens. I think you're not entirely wrong, but I'm cautious about thinking he's the next big thing.
And skill wise, just with it being heavyweight, he could end up go down as the best heavyweight of all time. I think heavyweight, anything can happen, but I think it is certainly possible. Let's talk briefly, very quickly, Overeem, I say it every time he loses. I think it just gets more and more valid of a point. I think it's kind of time for him to retire. He can still win fights. He can still beat almost everybody in the heavyweight division, but his chin's just so. I mean, I can't say his chin's terrible. I know it's terrible, but the Nagano knockout doesn't really prove it because Nagano could do that to anybody. But he's taken enough damage where I think it's probably a good time to hang them up.
I mean, well, one, I think there's not a human being alive who takes that punch and doesn't fall unconscious. So again, whatever on that point. He's not gonna retire, and that's fine. He doesn't have to. It's heavyweight. He still can get good, valid wins at his age. He's not seriously jeopardizing his health. If he wanted to hang him up, there's never been a time where I've said that fighter shouldn't retire. I think everybody should retire always in this sport. So if he wants to leave, great for him. He should leave. He's not going to, and I'm not ready to make the calls for him to retire in the same way I would for Michael Bisping or Diego Sanchez or something like that.
That's a lot of difference for sure. The guy is still ranked. Well, now he'll be ranked number 2 in the heavyweight division, just under Nagano and Stipe. So he's still at the top of the division. Let's talk about the madness that was Eddie Alvarez versus Justin Gaethje. One half of the 2 fight of the nights, of course, for the first time in a long time. The UFC gave out 2 fight of the night bonuses. The other one we will get to after this. Eddie Alvarez and Justin Gaethje put on a show, but shocking. And I think you were more confident in Gaethje than anybody, including myself. I was pretty confident Gaethje would stop Eddie Alvarez and pick up a devastating win. But I think like you were even more so than anybody I sort of talked to about this fight.
I was 100% certain in the outcome, and I was 100% wrong.
Eddie Alvarez got the job done. He knocks out Justin Gaethje with a knee in the 3rd round, as devastating as you'll see. Just because, as far as the knockout goes, no, I can't say that after talking about Nagano over him, but just the fact that Justin Gaethje can take almost anything and not go down. So when you knock out Justin Gaethje, it was a hard shot. I think that's pretty fair to say. But what a fight! Like this was, it lived up to expectations for the most part. It wasn't like the fight of the century. I think maybe even some people were hoping it would be, including myself. But it was back and forth. It was a war. It was fun. But I think the biggest thing, we just underestimated Eddie Alvarez. Like we thought he would take a punch and almost go down, and that was that. But he's still one of the best lightweights on the planet. I don't think there's any doubt about that. This just makes Conor McGregor's win over him look even better. And I think, I hate to say it, but I think we got to slow down on Justin Gaethje just a tad. I mean, last week we both said there's a good chance Gaethje beats Conor McGregor. Now I'm rethinking that.
I agree with some of what you said. I disagree with most of what you said. I think that we probably do need to slow down a wee bit on Justin Gaethje, but maybe not a ton. I don't think I underestimated Eddie Alvarez in one area, and that's the area that ended up winning the fight. I thought Eddie Alvarez wouldn't fight smart because Eddie Alvarez has been known to get into brawls, and basically I thought that maybe he might early kind of try and play an outside game, and then he would eventually get sucked into a wild brawl with Justin Gaethje, and then he was going to lose that fight, and he never did. And I think that people fundamentally misunderstand what happened in this fight. And that's, man, I hope you can still see me because my video looks like it was terrible. Okay. I think that people think that Eddie Alvarez and Justin Gaethje got into a brawl, and that is not accurate. But, I think Justin Gaethje fought a Justin Gaethje fight, and Eddie Alvarez fought
a technical brawl.
I don't think he even brawled. I thought he fought a very smart, very technical fight. He did exactly what he needed to do, and he attacked Justin Gaethje in ways that maximized his ability to win. Justin Gaethje didn't land a bunch of super clean punches to Eddie Alvarez's head. And, Eddie Alvarez gets dropped in every fight he's ever in. I don't recall him ever being dropped in this fight. Midway through the 2nd round, he started to really get shaken up by the leg kicks. But I don't recall Justin Gaethje ever really planting one on his face that kind of hurt Eddie Alvarez, because Eddie wasn't letting him. Eddie was dictating the exchanges and dictating the points of impact. And so Gaethje might hit a couple of shots, but Eddie did a couple of things I thought were really, really smart. He attacked the body relentlessly, which just took a ton out of Justin Gaethje. Gaethje has always had a bit of a cardio issue. Again, it's one of those cardio issues. He still throws, he's still dangerous, he's still effective, but you can see him kind of drop off a little bit, which is concerning. That that got exacerbated incredibly quickly because Eddie Alvarez was targeting the body so much early on that it kind of really sapped a lot of the energy from Gaethje. And then the other thing he did a lot, Gaethje has always been his defensive tactics has frequently relied on shelling and kind of ducking and just doing this guy right here and eating punches off his arms. And Eddie Alvarez never let him get away with that for free. He used so many uppercuts in the inside in the clinch. Every time they were in that kind of close quarter range, he was firing just uppercuts, uppercuts, uppercuts. And in the end, that knee he landed came right up the center as Justin Gaethje ducked his head down. I don't think it was really that much of a brawl from Eddie Alvarez. I thought he did a really good job of avoiding the brawl, only brawling in very minute exchanges and mostly kind of coming in and getting out in the better part of it. I thought it was a disciplined performance from Eddie Alvarez. And yeah, it was tough. Like, I'm not taking away the toughness of Eddie Alvarez.
It was one of his best performances in the UFC.
I think it is. I think it's the best performance of his career. I think bar none, it's the best performance of his career. But I think that there was toughness on display, but I don't. If he came out there and fought and brawled Eddie Alvarez and brawled Justin Gaethje, I stand by my assessment that he is going to get knocked the fuck out. But he didn't. He came out there and let Justin Gaethje brawl, and he took him apart in pieces and pieces. And Justin Gaethje is such a force of nature in the way he fights that, frankly, he still had a very good chance to win that fight. He had Eddie Alvarez's leg chewed up and hurt, and if he had been able to keep going forward, keep chopping away at that leg, maybe this fight ends up differently. But Eddie Alvarez never let him dictate the terms of the engagement, and I thought it was the best performance of Eddie Alvarez's career. You and I have talked about it. I think we've talked about it on the show. I've never been high on Eddie Alvarez. I think I'm like the only guy in MMA media space who like doesn't care much for him. Like, I don't dislike him. I'm just pretty indifferent to his whole career in general. I think after this win, he is. I think he is should justifiably be considered the greatest of all time at lightweight. I think he's lightweight GOAT. I think that there's not really a good argument for anybody else, frankly, based on resume, which is weird because I think that at precisely 0 points in the history of the sport has Eddie Alvarez ever been the best lightweight on the planet. But over the course of his career, the quality of his wins, I think, are better than anybody else's lightweight resume.
Well, yeah, I mean, you do. It's something no one really mentioned or even thought about, I don't think. But yeah, Wesley Riddle, of course, our co-host and Before the Battle, just put out a tweet that I was looking at with a list of basically Alvarez's notable wins: Justin Gaethje, Rafael dos Anjos, Anthony Pettis, Gilbert Melendez, Patrick Freire, Michael Chandler, Shinya Aoki, Pat Curran, Tatsuya Kawajiri, Joaquim Hansen, Roger Huerta, Josh Neer. Like, that's a long list of top talent.
Look, lightweight is a weird division in that it has always been the most talent-rich division, and nobody's ever really put together a sustained run. I think, frankly, at this moment, if you take my now assessment that Eddie Alvarez is the best out, if you remove that, I think the argument it comes down to BJ Penn versus probably Rafael dos Anjos. There's, you can make a case for Frankie Edgar, you can make a case for Benson Henderson. I will steadfastly call you a liar if you call Benson Henderson the greatest lightweight of all time, because Benson Henderson lost most of his biggest lightweight fights, and the judges just got confused.
I'm not sure you can make a case for RDA.
Yeah, you can. I mean, just because he's been around the game. He has a bunch of huge wins. Beating Anthony Pettis, big feather in your cap. I think that the problem with lightweight is there are problems with everybody has a difficult case to it. There are flaws in everybody's case.
It's a very close race because of how good lightweight has been.
Yeah, BJ is reflexively the choice as the greatest lightweight of all time. I think that's the corner I've stood on forever. I still think he's the best fighter ever, probably. But your argument for BJ being the greatest is really at this point, well, he was the best lightweight on the planet for a decade. Even though he never really he didn't spend all that time fighting at lightweight. He was doing other things. He fought Lyoto Machida, and he was Conor McGregor before Conor was. But his resume is not nearly what Eddie Alvarez's resume is, frankly.
Yep. Let's one last thing from this card, and I hate to go over miss some performances like Paul Felder's win, but Yancy Medeiros knocking out Alex Oliveira in the third round. this might have just been the best fight of 2017. Alvarez Gaethje. I
Got
think
my
that's
vote.
yeah. A lot of people, still have Gaethje Johnson up there. I'm before
That's the
I
other.
sort of
That's the only other choice in my opinion.
before I make sort of a final pick for what it's worth, if we do an end of year award show or whatever the case is, I'm gonna go back and watch both Yancey, Alex, and Gaethje Johnson. But considering, I mean, just thinking about it right off the top of my head, I'm thinking Yancey Medeiros was ever so slightly better. This was a war. Like this is what you call just they don't give any two shits. They don't give any shits. They just threw down. Both fighters were knocked down. Both fighters were nearly done, and but no one gave up until the very odd finish. Ever so slightly anticlimactic ending, but not really, just because of how good of a fight it was. Oliveira appeared to get hurt, but I think he just took enough damage where it's I'm done sort of thing. So a little confusing at the very end, but can't take away from the fight. Back and forth, just super super fun. Knockdowns all over the place, but toughness. Both fighters have played amazing toughness.
Yeah, I left this fight really confused because I don't understand how Yancy Medeiros was less tired after that first round than Alex Oliveira was somehow. And I don't think that there will ever be a scientific explanation for it. I'm not saying Cowboy Oliveira has the greatest cardio in the game, but he teed off on Yancy Medeiros in that first round. And I know Medeiros hurt him for a minute, but this was not Ali Foreman. This was not Yancy Medeiros shelling up and taking a bunch of shots off the arms. He was getting drilled in the face repeatedly. And that tires you out. Getting your ass beat is exhausting. But it's much more exhausting to get your ass beat than it is to beat somebody's ass. That is just a fact. If you're covering up and the other person is wailing on your arms, yeah, that other guy is probably going to get more tired. But that's not what happened here. Yancy Medeiros got drilled in the face a shitload and somehow came out in round 2, and Alex Oliveira was dead, and Medeiros was recovered. And I don't know if he's a black magic sorcerer, or I just don't know if he drank the blood of a child beforehand, because that makes zero sense that he could somehow have won the cardio battle after the shit kicking he took in the first round. But he did, and that ended up, frankly, being the difference in the fight. He still had gas going in, and Alex Oliveira just couldn't keep up. And then once Yancy Medeiros started putting it on to him, eventually, I think you're correct. I don't think it was a single shot. I think it was much like the Roy McDonald, Robbie Lawler, where Rory just kind of eventually everything shut down on him because he'd been so fucked up. I think that was just what happened with Cowboy. So wild fight, very entertaining. Very impressive from Yancy Medeiros, because Alex Oliveira had secretly been on a very good run as of late. I mean, he beat who did he beat? He beat Tim Means.
LaFleur.
He beat Ryan LaFleur, who is a very solid fighter. Will Brooks, who I know hasn't done a lot in the division, but still a really top to bottom solid guy. So great win for Yancy Medeiros.
Yes. Let us move on real quick to UFC Fresno. We went on a bit long, I think, more so than anything on the TUF card. But let's talk about 2 fights from this card: main event, and also Marlon Moraes versus Aljamain Sterling. Those seem to be sort of the two big fights. I know Jason Knight's in the co-main, and he's super fun. But if anybody wants our more detailed, in-depth picks, watch before the battle later this week. But first off, Marlon Moraes taking on Aljamain Sterling, bantamweight, super fun fight. Marlon Moraes is stepping up on short notice. Aljamain Sterling was supposed to fight Hani Yahya, if I'm not mistaken.
I believe that's accurate.
And that was going to be kind of interesting, but this was a lot tougher of a fight for Sterling than Yahya is. Marlon Moraes is secretly, not even a secret, but I think he's almost the dark horse of the division, just because he did lose to Rafael Sanzao. He's 1-1 now in the UFC, coming off that win over John Dodson, which you scored for Dodson. It was a close fight, but this is another close one. It's going to skyrocket in a way that the winner, I think they move pretty close to a crack the title. Moraes or Sterling, who are you feeling here?
I think not Sergio Moraes. Shit, Marlon Moraes. I think Marlon Moraes is going to get it done. I could be wrong. Aljamain Sterling seems to be improving. It was weird. We expected a lot of him, and then he sort of kind of didn't reach the levels of progression we expected out of him, and now he seems to maybe be catching back up to get to the point we all kind of thought he'd get to. He's still really not a very good striker, though. His strength is his grappling. I think Marlon Moraes is going to be able to keep it close on the feet. Frankly, I wouldn't be super surprised if Marlon Moraes won a very contentious decision here as well. He's just not the most offensively potent guy, and that kind of lends himself to having closely contested fights. And, like I said, I thought Dodson beat him. I thought Assunção beat him. I won't be surprised if I'll leave this fight thinking that Aljamain Sterling edged him out too.
It's funny because I scored both Assunção and Dodson from Moraes.
Yeah, well, you've always been bad at scoring fights, so
kind of think it's the other way. But look at history as far as where
I'm definitely great at scoring fights.
Yeah, I gotta agree. Give me Marlon Moraes here as well. I think he's the better guy on the feet. Sterling has a significant reach advantage. He is lanky for the division, so if he's able to keep distance, then he might be able to do good things on the feet. He's getting better, but I don't think he's good enough technically and at controlling distance and keeping range to keep Moraes sort of off him. Not off him, but, out of his sort of, the bubble or whatever. I think Moraes can close the distance quite well, land some hard shots, and ultimately outpoint him there. Sterling's best shot is on the ground. But I think this would mostly be a stand-up fight, and Moraes will win by decision. Main event actually is pretty fun, and I think up until just a few days ago, I was not counting Brian Ortega out of this one, but I was just sort of assuming, Brian Ortega is not losing, but he's lost so many rounds and then comes back. Is he great? Maybe this will be his coming out party, but Cub Swanson probably gets the job done. But I've sort of been thinking, I think it's closer than I initially thought. Who do you take here? The veteran in Cub Swanson or the undefeated Brian Ortega?
I'm taking Cub Swanson because I just don't trust Brian Ortega. I fully expect Brian Ortega to lose the first 2 rounds and then get a submission or a stoppage in the third, because that's what his record is all like third-round stoppages. He is a notoriously slow starter. He's definitely losing the first round, 100%. If I could bet my house on it, I would.
As you said.
I think that there's a likelihood he loses the second, but I don't know. To me, he plays with fire. I know this is a 5-round fight, so that's nice. That gives him more rounds for him to finally start fighting and look good.
He doesn't need to finish in the third.
Yeah, now he has more opportunities going later. But to me, he has always played with fire. His career that we've seen, he has looked disinterested and disengaged early on, and it has resulted in him, giving up rounds to fighters that he shouldn't give up rounds to, and then just coming back. And so I can't trust him. I can't believe in him. Because you can't do eventually that's not going to happen. Eventually you're not going to be like, oh, it's time for me to start fighting now. I'm just going to go triangle this dude. And I would be surprised if he was just like, oh, I should just go beat Cub Swanson right now, because if not, I'm going to lose on the judges' cards. So, I'm taking Cub Swanson, but, it's an opportunity for Brian Ortega to show what he's really about. And maybe he's just one of those guys that I'll never be able to get a read on because his process is not strong, but he's dynamic and a great finisher, and that's enough to make up for having kind of a shitty fight process.
It's almost as if Brian Ortega fights to his competition level. Like he keeps getting steps up.
He just doesn't give a shit. He doesn't act like he cares the first 2 rounds.
Yeah.
And his corner's like, Brian, you're fucking losing. He's like, oh shit, it's round 3. I'm losing. I guess I better go fight now. If he just came out and was like, oh, I'm going to go fight now, it'd be awesome. He'd be a hell of a fighter.
Yeah.
As it is, he's still a good fighter, but I don't know how good he is because he's so
only see him fight for 1 round of 3. Yeah.
Yeah, he's so mercurial.
This is a weird one. It's a big step up for Brian, so I'm interested and intrigued to see how he deals with someone like Cub Swanson, who he's never fought anyone of Cub's caliber. And Ortega is so weird just because of the fact that he loses 2 rounds and then taps the guy out or knocks the guy out in the third. And can you count on that against a guy like Cub Swanson? I don't know if you can. If this was a 3-rounder, I would pick Cub Swanson. If it's a 5-rounder, I'm actually leaning Brian Ortega ever so slightly. I think this is a guy who fights to his competition. I think the bigger step up you give him, I think he actually will perform pretty well on Saturday in Fresno. I think Cub Swanson picks him apart on the feet for the first 2 at the very least. I don't think he continues his streak of 3rd-round stoppages. I think Swanson's good enough to avoid getting stopped that quickly. But I think Ortega is able to start getting into the mat where Swanson, that's his biggest weakness. pretty much on the mat. And I think Ortega starts, doing work on the ground. And I think he actually probably submits Cub Swanson probably in the fourth round. A bit later than usual, but I do think Ortega actually gets the finish. I no shock if Swanson, if it goes his way, because he's one of the best. He's been one of the best for a long time. But I'm gonna go out on a bit of limb, and I was surprised that Ortega opened as a very slight favorite. I was really surprised to see that. I was thinking about this fight that it would be a bit of an upset, but I guess right now it's not. Let's move on to Gets It Doesn't Get It, and let's do this real quick. UFC for booking Daniel Cormier versus Volkan Ozdemir, considering Ozdemir was just arrested last month.
Gets it. I think it's still the fight to make since they decided to let Ryan Bader go for no real reason.
Yeah, UFC is clearly not too worried about looking great in the mainstream audience.
He's not going to jail.
Eyes.
He's not going to jail.
No, he's not. Of course not. He'll get a bit of community service or a fine or whatever.
He'll do community service. He'll pay a big fine. He'll have to make some public speeches about not hitting people, and it's fine.
Yeah,
and he's not winning the title, so it super doesn't fucking matter.
Yeah, and the UFC kind of needs this. Like, this is, I mean, they just have like a lack of availability for champions, it seems, right now. So I think they're not counting on this to be a big draw.
There's no one to fight Daniel Cormier either.
But exactly, with Gustafsson hurt.
Gustafsson's injured out till probably the summer.
Yes. Yep.
And DC wants to fight soon. Like, he either fights Jimmy Manuwa, who's coming off getting knocked the fuck out by Ozdemir, who also happens to be Gus's training partner, or he fights Ovince St. Preux, I guess. Like, who just choked out a fucking welterweight.
The UFC gets it here. Yeah. The UFC gets it. The next one is Carlos Monarez. This is the guy who wrote the UFC 218 recap post on Detroit Free Press. I would assume you at least looked at it.
Yep, I read it.
Does he get it or not get it?
Controversial opinion. I think he sort of gets it. I think the MMA media reflexively hates this guy, and
we all love MMA, but
I think that they have valid points, and I think that parts of his thing are very shoddily done. Being unable to spell Ronda Rousey's name correctly, that's just bad journalism. Like, I don't cover baseball, but if I were to go to the World Series or to write about something I know nothing about, I at the very least would know how to spell like the biggest players' names correctly. So that's a bit of shoddy journalism, and I think that everybody's just like got their pitchforks up when he was like, yeah, UFC 219 wasn't that great because it was one of the better cards of the year. But I also think he makes valid points in that UFC production is shit, and that 7-hour fight cards are fucking terrible. Like, this is a thing that we don't talk about in the sport and in the media specifically and in the fan base because we're conditioned to it. Like, this is just what we know now. But no other entertainment, much less, I told Mookie Alexander, your Bloody Elbow colleague, we were having a discussion about this. No other sport, not even just other sport, no other entertainment form lasts as long as fight cards do. A football game lasts 3.5 hours. And those are already considered long. Most people don't watch football all day Sunday. Some people do, and some people watch 8-hour-long fight cards. But most people watch the games they're interested in. Like, oh, I'm from Pittsburgh, I'll watch the Steelers play. They don't go, I am from Pittsburgh, I'm going to watch this game between the Chargers and the Titans. Like this, they don't give a fuck. Or they'll just have it on the background. Fighting is a long-ass production. The only thing that is as long as fighting are like concert festivals. And the only reason people like 3-day concert festivals are because they take drugs at those things. So like, I think it's a totally valid criticism to be like, hey, it was really fucking long. There were only 13 fights, but it took us 8 hours. And some of them were boring because, yeah, Henry Cejudo, Sergio Pettis was fucking boring. Tisha Torres versus Michelle Waterson was fucking boring. And I'm sorry, I know that they were technically impressive in many respects.
Don't apologize.
Yeah,
it's true.
They're fucking boring. And the UFC's production hasn't changed since 2003 or whatever. Like, it's boring too. Like
that's why Ryzen and Bellator is so great. Their production is so much better than UFC's.
I think that there are parts of Bellator, yes, but Ryzen is great. But yeah, like I think he makes valid points. I also think his being like he clearly is also a guy who doesn't really give it. He doesn't give a shit about MMA. This is not his sport, and so he doesn't care. And so and that's fine. Like, we don't need to excoriate somebody for not giving a fuck about the sport. Like, okay, it's not for him. That's cool.
Yeah, it's interesting. I agree with the production stuff, but for the most part, I disagree with what he wrote about. So ultimately, it doesn't get it from me. I just sort of think if you're going to cover the sport, at least know about it, like know what a good fight is. Like Eddie Alvarez versus Justin Gaethje
He's
was a
not
very
covering the sport. That's the thing.
no,
He
but no,
went to
writing this
cover it.
article counts as covering the sport. He doesn't
No,
cover
but he's
it.
not
It's not
covering
his
the
daily.
sport. It's a local newspaper. He went to a local event. The same way that if I just
No,
wrote for
okay,
Vox
okay.
Media writ
You're
large,
misinterpreting what I mean by cover. He covered the event. He wrote an article about mixed martial arts, about UFC
yeah, he doesn't have to
218.
know he doesn't have to know if fights are good. He has to know how to spell Ronda Rousey's name, 100%. But if I'm paid, for Vox Media, and suddenly they're like,
Well,
"Hey, I
don't
want you
write
to go
an
cover this
opinion
concert
if
hall."
you don't know about the sport. Just write a
No,
recap. Just say this happened,
why?
this
You
happened.
can give a fucking opinion. He gave an opinion, and it is fine to think that that card sucked. That's a
No, it's
valid
not.
opinion.
No,
Yes, it
no,
is.
it,
It's a
it
valid
really
opinion.
isn't.
It is. It's a valid opinion, and you're part of the problem because we live in the sport and we love this sport. We think that's a wrong opinion, but it's not. It is a
We know
valid
though when a
opinion.
card is terrible.
No, we know when a card is bad to us. It is a he is not saying that he is saying an opinion. He is not saying that Demetrius Johnson is tall. That's a wrong
Of
opinion.
course.
He is saying
But
that this card was not that entertaining, which is an opinion, and it's a fine one to have, even if you disagree with it, because fighting is not for everybody, which is why it's not the biggest fucking sport in the world.
yeah, I feel like he needs to make that more clear though. Like, yeah, I don't know. I see your point about it not being like he can say, and he's totally okay to say I was not entertained by UFC 218, but I don't think it's fair to say that 218 on UFC perspective or standards was a bad card because on the standards of UFC card, it was a very good card.
I think it's a completely fair assessment. I think a majority of human beings would agree with him, and a majority of people who buy pay-per-views agree with him because when the numbers come out for this fucking thing, it's going to have sold 200K, which means most people didn't give a shit about watching it. So I think that we still, as MMA media and fans, have this little brother feeling. We're like, man, if anybody talks bad about it, like, fuck them, blah. Like, we don't need to concern ourselves or give a shit if somebody says something's bad. Like, okay, that's fine. And I'm fine with him. Like, my biggest issue was really that he couldn't bother to spell Ronda Rousey's name correctly because that is shoddy journalism. But other than that, like, he gave an opinion that I disagree with in many parts, but I think that it's fine.
Angel
I'll die on this
Magana
hill.
Angela Magana ran on Twitter after her stoppage loss at 218 to Amanda Bobby Cooper, saying she thought it was an early stoppage, and also that if she was a man, the fight wouldn't have been stopped, and in general, fights would be stopped, or they would be given more leeway as far as taking punishment and not getting the referee intervening. Does Magana get it or not get it?
Magana will never get it. Magana is actually really weird in that she often doesn't get it, but sometimes she blind squirrels her way into finding the nut of getting it right. I think that she probably has a valid point with the
About the
female fighters getting
yes,
stopped earlier. I think that that's fair. I don't think that this was one of those occasions.
of
I
course
also
not.
think that she is trying desperately to save a job that is astonishing she has in the first place. So I think that in the second part of that, she maybe gets it a little bit. I think she's dead doesn't get it for the this fight shouldn't have been stopped part.
Yeah, I agree. Gets it. I guess I think her opinion should be treated fairly. I mean, I think it there she has a point. I don't know if it's true, but I think you can argue it's true with the whole female male thing. But as far as the stoppage being bad, no, it was a fine stoppage. Probably could have been stopped earlier, so it doesn't get it for that. Donald Cerrone recently announced he's dropping back down to 155, and that he will not take as many fights. So sort of two-parter. I think will sort of gets it for one, doesn't get it for the other. That's what I think.
Gets it for both. I think if he wants to drop to 155, it's okay. He's not cutting an enormous amount of weight to do so. A lot of interesting fights for him there. So I always thought he was a very good lightweight, probably one of the top 10 best in the world, and there's a ton of opportunity for him at the division. And you know me, I'm not one of those guys who cares about the weight cutting like you or Raymondi or a bunch of other people do.
And I do care about the weight cut. That is why he doesn't get it for going back down to 155. I know he can be undersized at 170, but I think
He
up
walks around at
until
like 170 pounds.
Up until this year, he was performing very well at 170. I think more than anything, it's just because he's physically declining, not because he's getting, fighting bigger men. And I think the weight cut will just have a bigger impact on him. I think the decline will be faster at 155, but I do think he gets it for not taking as many fights. I think that's a big factor.
He's just fighting
The more
better
fights you take,
people.
the less fresh you'll be, the more punishment you take. So I think taking less fights, taking more breaks is good, but I think dropping down back to 155, not a terrible move. It's not like super unrealistic, like Ray Maynard at 145, which has somehow worked out a little bit, or Diego Sanchez, even worse than 145, but I think he's better off at 170. So
he's just fighting better people. That's the whole thing. Like, he fought worse people early when he went to welterweight. He fought Rick Story, who's not as good as the guys he was fighting at lightweight. And then now he fought Masvidal, Darren Till, and who else did he lose to? Who was the third one?
Lawler.
Yeah, okay. He lost to Robbie Lawler, Darren Till, and George Masvidal. Like, yeah, he could stick around welterweight and do fine if he keeps fighting Rick Stories of the world. But, like, yeah, he's fighting the better ones there. So, like, and he was fighting worse welterweights. If he goes down to lightweight, he'll lose to some people. But if he goes to lightweight, we can also get him to fight Justin Gaethje. So, fuck yeah. I'm for that.
And last one, the man who live streamed the entire UFC 218 broadcast, and it wasn't taken down supposedly because he pretended to play it as if it was EA UFC or whatever. Gets it or doesn't get it?
I mean,
keep in mind the fact that he'll probably get punished in a big way.
Shout out to you, guy. Keep fighting the good fight for the little guy. But I guess he doesn't get it because he's gonna get slapped with a big fucking lawsuit because that's what the UFC does. So.
Yeah, it's kind of a tough one. He
gets it because the idea was hilarious.
Yeah, it's sort of both because it's going to bite him in the ass, but because he's going to have to pay up a ton of money most likely. But hey, he's getting all this coverage. And I know you weren't too fond of the fact that I wrote an article on it.
Stop snitching. It wasn't just you; a lot of other people did. Stop snitching.
Yeah, no. Well, nonetheless, I did, and it's giving him more exposure so, the idea was great, super creative, and something not too many people would think of. So gets it for that and getting exposure. That's cool too, I guess, I would think. But the fact that he's going to have to pay up a bunch of money at the end of the day, is it really worth it? Probably not. So doesn't get it, I guess. But so part of me says gets it. That is it. We have no dumb questions. So that is it for episode 140 of the MMA Circus. Thanks to you, Jed, of course, for stepping up for Andrew Lawrence as always. Let everybody know where they can find you on social media and anything else you got to plug.
You can find my writing at MMAfighting.com. Check that out. You can find me on social media at Jed Meshew on Twitter. Check that out too.
Alrighty, you guys can find me on the Twitter at Nick Baldwin MMA. You can find all of my writing over at bloodyelbow.com. You can find also this podcast if you're listening somewhere else on Bloody Elbow, so make sure to check that out as well. I have some interviews up with Volkan Ozdemir and Valentino Shevchenko. I did those last night as we speak, and so go check those out. Those are on this YouTube channel exclusively, and will be up on Bloody Elbow when I write them up. Write an article later this week as well, most likely. You can find my other podcast, Before the Battle and Beyond Combat, on this YouTube channel as well. Jed and I will be doing Before the Battle UFC Fresno edition this Thursday at 11 p.m. Eastern, I believe, at night. I don't think Wes from MMA Circus will be joining us, but that could change. We'll keep you informed. Beyond Combat is off this week. We'll be back next week. That's not anything new. We just take it's every 2 weeks. I think that's pretty much it. You can find the MMA Circus on iTunes, Stitcher, Pocket Cast, Google Play, TuneIn, Player FM, Overcast, Podcast Addict, SoundCloud, if I didn't say it already, and of course, you're on YouTube. Thank you all for listening. We appreciate it. Go rate us, review us, subscribe. Go give us a like right down here. Go comment. Go subscribe to this YouTube channel, and that is all I ask of you. Thank you very much for listening. For Jed Meshew, my name's Nick Baldwin, and we are out. Love you guys, because Jed is gone. Bye.